Good morning, everybody, and welcome back. I'm Mary, the OG Woo Woo therapist, and I want to welcome you to this week's episode recorded in my functional but versatile home office that is one block from the interstate where traffic noise is a real thing and can be disruptive. So I apologize in advance for any noise disruptions. And, as usual, I have to tell you that everything I talk about today is not intended to take the place of counseling or therapy. It is only for educational purposes. If you relate to any of the information, do not self-diagnose or diagnose anyone else. Seek a professional to talk about it. And I need to give an additional cautionary note that it's important to respect safety through pacing and supporting choice. This means moving slowly, explaining concepts in a grounding way, and as always, you're invited to pause, skip ahead, or come back later. I encourage you to take in the information in chunks. So this is another client suggested topic. It was a young client who suggested it, and so we're just going to go with it. And this is a topic that is kind of close to my heart because I got my little dog to be a therapy dog, and then COVID happened. And the trainer quit coming, so she never got to do her Good Sam training so that she learned her manners and was appropriate with clients. So she ended up being a pet rather than a therapy dog. And as you have heard in some previous episodes, she tends to bark whenever she sees something outside that's interesting and she wants to bark at. So anyway, let me ask you this question. Have you ever had the feeling that an animal understood you without a single word being spoken? Maybe it was a dog who stayed beside you when everything felt like it was falling apart. Not trying to fix it, not asking questions, just there. Today we're exploring a question that sits at the intersection of science, emotion, and spirituality. Which animals are the most intuitive, and why do they feel so deeply connected to us? And woven through all of that, we're going to explore something deeper. What is it about dogs in particular that makes people feel like they don't just love us, but somehow understand our souls? Before we talk about animals, let's define intuition. Scientifically, it's subconscious pattern recognition, emotional attunement, and reading cues without conscious thought. But spiritually, intuition is often described as a sensitivity to energy, a connection beyond language, and or a kind of awareness that feels almost sacred. And this is where animals, especially dogs, enter a unique space. Because when people describe their connection to dogs, they rarely stop at behavior. They use words like soulmate, guardian, and sent to me. Humans often search for meaning and connection, especially during loneliness or grief. And animals, particularly dogs, can become emotional anchors that help people feel less alone in their inner world. Let's go deeper than science for a moment. Across cultures and history, dogs are not just companions, they're spiritual figures. In ancient Egypt, the god Anubis, who is depicted with a canine head, guided souls into the afterlife. In Greek mythology, Cerberus guarded the gates of the underworld. In many indigenous traditions, dogs are seen as protectors and guides between worlds. There is a recurring idea here that dogs don't just live with humans, they walk beside us, sometimes even between worlds. Connection with an animal can bring some of the deepest healing. It is not uncommon for my clients to have animals that they connect with on an emotional level, so that when I am in session with them virtually, I can see how their animals are reacting to them or acting towards them, and it helps me to be more sensitive to the emotional state of my clients. Many times people believe that dogs choose their humans, that dogs arrive during pivotal life moments, and that dogs sense emotional wounds we haven't expressed. And as I said before, I got my little Winky just before we had to shut down for COVID. And I believe that she showed up at the time when I was going to be locked in my house for 18 months all on my own. And she was my only company. And while science explains their sensitivity through evolution and bonding, it doesn't fully capture the experience. Because when a dog sits with you in silence during grief, or refuses to leave your side when you're struggling, or looks at you in a way that feels like you are seen, it doesn't just feel like instinct, it feels intentional. Across belief systems, there are powerful ideas about dogs beyond this life. Some believe dogs wait for their humans after death. Others believe they act as guides or protectors in spiritual transitions. The concept of the rainbow bridge, where the dog waits for its human and then crosses, reflects a deep emotional truth that bonds with animals feel ongoing, not finished. Grief over a dog often feels different than other grief, not lesser, not greater, but purer, because it was never complicated. Grieving a pet can be just as intense as grieving a human relationship, because dogs often represent unconditional love, emotional safety, and consistency. Losing that can feel like losing a part of your emotional foundation. There was a time that I did suicide assessments in the emergency rooms for a hospital group in North Texas. I was called in several times to different emergency rooms to do assessments with elderly people who had lost their companion animals to death and illness. Across the board, the people I was assessing expressed not having the will to live now that they were completely alone. I understand this in a way that some don't, because I can't imagine my life without my Winky. So dogs are spiritually aware, or are they not? This is where science and spirituality begin to overlap. Dogs respond to energy shifts, detect illness and emotional distress, and react to things humans don't consciously notice. Some interpret this as heightened senses, others as something more. Maybe dogs don't think about meaning the way we do, but they live in such a constant state of presence that they tap into something we've forgotten how to access. Now, let's look at dolphins, where intelligence meets empathy. Dolphins show us a different kind of intuition, one rooted in intelligence and social awareness. They communicate in complex ways, recognize themselves in mirrors, and help other beings, including humans. If dogs feel like emotional guardians, then dolphins feel like conscious collaborators. Observing intelligent, empathetic animals reinforces our own need for connection and belonging. Here is an animal that many of us don't think of as intuitive or having some kind of spirituality, and that is elephants, who believe to connect memory, grief, and sacred emotion. Elephants remind us that emotion is not uniquely human. They mourn, remember, and return to places of loss. There's a reverence in how elephants experience emotion, almost like they honor it. And seeing grief mirrored in animals can help people feel less alone in their own emotional depth. Another animal that is perceived as intuitive is cats, where energy meets subtle awareness. Despite their seeming indifference or aloofness, cats can form deep connections with humans. However, cats connect differently. They enter emotional spaces quietly, sit in stillness, and respond to energy rather than attention. If dogs meet you in your emotions, cats can sit beside it. A lot of my clients have cats, and as soon as we initiate session, one of my clients has a cat that has to jump up and be right there by the screen, and will walk in front of the screen as though rubbing against my face or rubbing against some part of me. And it's very interesting to watch this little cat interact with both of us while we're in session. And I have another client whose cat, when he senses that she is having some strong emotions, will jump up and want some attention from her during that time. So the other thing is, with cats, that they can be silent readers of emotion, and they can also let us know when something is off. My daughter has a cat that I used to have that is kind kind of high strung, I guess. Her name is Tonks. And my daughter inherited her when I was traveling around the country last year in my RV. Tonks was just a kitten at the time. She was maybe 4 months old, but she was way too big for my little 18-foot trailer that also housed me and Winky. And Tonks just kind of took over the space, so Winky and I both felt like intruders in our own home. So when I was in Michigan, my daughter said that if I was going to rehome Tonks, that she would take her, that my great-granddaughter wanted her. So Tonks got left in Michigan, and it took her a little while to fit into the family, but she is definitely part of the family now. And she provides comic relief, along with keeping the other animals engaged and activated, and is a great reader of energy. I miss my little Tonks, but I get to visit her every year when I go to Michigan, so that's something. And I think that she's beginning to recognize me. So now, moving on, some people believe that horses mirror the truth about us. Horses reflect what's real. They sense internal tension, respond to authenticity, and mirror emotional states. A horse doesn't respond to who you say you are, only to who you are in that moment. This kind of mirroring can be powerful in trauma healing and emotional awareness. You might remember the scenes in 28 Days with Sandra Bullock, where she had to be in control of her emotional energy to get the horse to lift its foot. Once she was able to accomplish that, she was able to go home. Over the years, we have seen a proliferation of equine therapy that is available all over the United States for adults, teens, and kids of all intellectual abilities. Equine therapy is proving to be some of the best therapy for healing. Now let's look at the bigger picture. Take a minute to think a bit about why animals feel spiritual. Across species, intuitive animals share presence, sensitivity, emotional awareness, and nonverbal communication. But spiritually, they represent something else, a return to simplicity, a way of being that is unfiltered, honest, and fully in the moment. If there's one animal that bridges science and spirituality, it's the dog. Not because they're magical, but because they remind us of something we've lost. The ability to be present without distraction, love without condition, and stay without needing a reason. Maybe dogs don't understand our souls in a mystical way. Maybe they just meet us at the deepest level we're capable of being known. And maybe that feels like something spiritual, because it is. Think about a dog or a pet you've loved. When did they show up in your life? What did they seem to understand about you? And why does that connection still feel ongoing? Because sometimes the most spiritual relationship you'll ever have is the one that never needed words. So thank you for joining me today. I know this is not a typical topic for mental health discussions, but it is deeply and profoundly important to our mental health. And to understand how and why our animals help us in our lives more than we will know by what we see in their typical behaviors. There has been a recent rise in the need for emotional support animals. In my practice, I have had to write several letters for people for emotional support animals. One of them, the most interesting one, was for a young girl that was going away to college, and she had an emotional support rabbit. So I had to write that letter to be submitted to the college for permission for her to be able to have her rabbit in her room with her. It was an interesting situation, and in order to be able to write the letter to support that, rather than her just taking her pet with her, I had to ask her to bring her rabbit into session with her and see how the rabbit interacted with her. So she brought the rabbit in, and it was very well trained. It didn't jump down on the floor and leave little pellets anywhere. So I was very impressed with that, first of all, because that is my thought about rabbits. So while we were in session, one of the things that I noticed is that when we got to very deep emotional topics, the rabbit would jump up and sit next to her with its head on her lap, on the top of her leg. And then she would begin to stroke the rabbit and pull on the rabbit's ears or pet the rabbit's ears. And as she did that, I noticed that her emotions would immediately calm. And that was enough to convince me right there that I needed to write this emotional support animal letter for her. I have written several also for dogs and cats. I haven't written any for horses because most of the times people are going into rentals like apartments or going away to college where they're going to be in dorm rooms. And in order to have their animals with them and not have to pay that extra $450 a month, I don't know if any of you rent and have that circumstance, but I know where I live that if my dog was not an emotional support animal, which I got my therapist to write that letter during COVID, then I would be paying an extra $450 a month for her to be here with me, which I think is kind of expensive for a dog to live in my apartment, since I'm the one who walks her, feeds her, waters her, cleans up after her, and all that stuff. I don't know why I have to pay an extra $450 a month for that. But anyway, I digress. My little Winky has been very comforting for me. And when we're on the road, she is my early morning system. If anybody's walking around outside my trailer, she lets me know, whether it's deer, possum, raccoon, cat, it doesn't matter. She lets me know what's walking around my trailer when we're on the road. And I appreciate her for that a lot. The other thing is that when I get to a place where, because I do live alone, and when I get to a place where living alone feels lonely, she becomes a Velcro dog. She will not be more than a foot away from me at any time. And that is something interesting that when I notice that, then that tells me it's time for me to get out and be a little bit social. As a textbook introvert, that's not something that I'm going to just do on the regular. And so when she becomes a clingy Velcro dog, then that's when I decide, okay, I'm going to go play bingo today, just to get out and be social with people and not really have to be engaged with them in conversation, because we're there to play bingo. We're not there to chat and converse. However, some of that does happen before the bingo session and a little bit after. And depending on who the floor workers are, sometimes there will be some chatting with them. But when she gets clingy, that's when I know it's time for me to get out and do something social. And then when I come back, she's not clingy anymore. And I used to think it was because I left her alone. And so now she's just paying me back for being left alone. But that's not the case at all. She just is not clingy to me anymore because she doesn't pick up on that loneliness vibe. And I don't ever really feel lonely, which is kind of interesting when she picks up on that vibe that I'm kind of giving off, that I need some kind of social interaction. When I lived closer to my sister, I used to just go see her, and Winky loved that because her cousin Zeus is there, and she loves playing with Zeus. He's an older dog. He's, I don't know, 12 or 13 now. But when she's around, he gets spunky and he likes to play with her. And they'll go outside together. If she goes out, he'll go out. And if he goes out, she'll go out. So in the early days, Winky grew up with him because Zeus came to live with us when Winky was just a puppy. And then my sister took him because I'm allergic to his fur. So he's a teacup Chihuahua. And so my sister took him with her when she came back to Arizona, because she would come and live with me for 6 months in San Antonio and then go back to Arizona for 6 months. And so when he would come home, Winky would just be in seventh heaven, and then she would be depressed and lonely when he left. But I think that overall, her being able to pick up on that sense of when I'm not, maybe it's when I'm feeling alone, not being alone, because being alone has never bothered me. But when I feel alone, I think that's when she gets Velcro with me. And that is just from the fact that we've been together since 2020. And so she has learned to read me, and I've learned to read her. So it's a pretty good combination, a pretty good partnership for us. So anyway, thank you for letting me share a little bit about my experiences. And I appreciate you being here with me this week. And I know this isn't a topic that appeals to everybody, but it is a topic that sometimes if we stop and think about, it can be a question that we can do some wondering about. Do dogs really have spirituality? And I think they do. I think that my little dog Winky is connected with me on a level that goes beyond owner, pet. It goes beyond that. She's more like my child. And in my family, she is frequently referred to as my children's sister, which is kind of interesting. So sometimes I'll put through a FaceTime call to my daughters so that they can talk to her sister. So anyway, with that, I'm going to close off today. Thank you for being here. And I will be back next week with another topic that is client suggested. And we'll just keep going on from there. So if you found this topic interesting, please engage with this podcast by liking and subscribing, and maybe even leaving a comment. And with that, I'll sign off for this week, and I will talk to you all next week. Thank you for being here.